strangely warm. I'm Daniel Hawkins, your host. I'm so excited today as we move into the beginning of a new football season to have somebody new here with me this morning, somebody who you may not know yet, but you'll get to know better by the end of our time together. Isaac Saenz, Bishop Reuben Saenz' youngest and most beloved son, right? Favorite son. Okay. We got to make sure that gets out there into the world properly, right?
Yep.
Your brothers hear that clearly, and we just got to make sure it's known.
Yeah.
Isaac's here today in part because you're probably like the most experienced and best podcaster in the studio right now. It is what you do professionally on a day in, day out basis. It is over the last how many years?
Probably about 5 or 6 years now.
Okay, so for 5 or 6 years, you've built an audience, and your podcast and social media presence called ProFootballChase has, what, if I'm doing the quick math, over 325,000 followers across the different social media platforms and things, and a weekly audience that's just huge. And so we're here not to talk about pro football, although we'll touch on it a little bit along the way, but to get a window into your life and a window into your life and faith. And so share with us a little bit about, who you are and how you have come to this moment of life, right? Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about the journey with ProFootballChase and what has you most excited coming into this new football season.
Yeah, well, first off, thanks again for having me. It's a pleasure to be on the podcast, and it's a great setup here. It looks like a typical closet from the outside. You open it up, you got a little studio in here, so it's kind of cool. But yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, so I appreciate you having me. But yeah, to answer your question, Isaac Saenz, I'm the youngest and the favorite, as I'm glad you brought that up. That's important. But yeah, I grew up in a household full of sports. Okay. My dad played D1 football. My 2 older brothers played football. And so I knew from an early age, and based on all the football that I used to watch growing up and getting under my brother Reuben's skin when the Longhorns were playing, going for the Huskers, go Big Red, by the way. But yeah, and so I knew I always had a passion for sports. I played baseball, I played football, and so growing up in a household as a pastor's kid, and so getting acclimated to the long Sundays of showing up early and leaving later because, my mom always would hold up the lines talking with the people and, being there till 2 or 3 in the afternoon. And then it's like, well, the Cowboys, what time are they playing? And trying to find, we got to make sure we get back in time or stream it or record it and nobody tell us the score. And so just, funny things like that. But a little bit about myself. I mean, I've always known that I want to get into the sports media space. And so growing up, I knew that I was like, man, I want to be behind the mic. I want to be calling games and I want to be covering football. Has always been my number one choice. I mean, I watch all kinds of sports, baseball, basketball, but growing up, being the youngest, being able to see my older brothers play and really find that passion for it. And so that's really where it stemmed my interest coming out of high school. Was like, man, I want to do this. I knew UT Arlington, being born in Dallas, because that's where my parents were. My dad was in seminary when I was born here in Dallas. Okay. And then we went to El Paso for a little bit, and then went to the Valley in Rio, Texas, and San Antonio. And then I said, I want to get back to Dallas. And so I eventually went to a junior college for a year and a half, got my basics done, then came to UT Arlington, which is right down the street from where we're at. And I found that they had a UTA radio station, and I was like, this is cool. Yeah. I was able to call some games for UTA basketball. They don't have a football team here,
right?
But I was able to call games for basketball, baseball, softball, and host my own sports talk show for UTA radio on iHeartRadio. And so I really was able to, I guess, hone in on my skills and really have a good time of say, you know what, this is something I really want to do. And it kind of sparked my ProFootballChase page. In fact, I started them before I went to UT Arlington. So this was my senior year of high school. Okay. And so I just wanted to start a page. I said, you know what? I think it'd give me good practice, just reporting news and, the rap sheets and sure. Adam Schefter. And those are the big NFL insiders. And so I said, I'll just kind of get their news and reshare it and give them credit. And, long story short, man, I just next thing you know, I started getting more and more followers, and agents started following my page, and players, and I stuck with it through college. And even though I was studying for other stuff and doing other stuff, I always made it a point to be posting news and injury updates. And it eventually started gaining traction. And I said, hey, man, like, people are relying on my stuff for fantasy. They're like, hey, man, you're always giving
who's
us
in, who's out. Yeah.
Who's playing, who's not. And so I just kind of got a sense of like, hey, man, I may be onto something here. Like, I may be able to have a little niche here and get some people that are following and stuff like that. And so that's kind of what spurred everything.
When did the podcast start in that journey?
So it started a couple of years after I started the page. So it was one of those things where I started having some smaller college prospects that were coming from smaller schools, and those agents would email me and say, hey, do you happen to have like any podcasts we can get our clients some exposure? And so at the time I was like, well, no, I don't, but I can start one. And so that's kind of what gave me the idea, like, let's kickstart this. Let's get something. It's not rocket science to start a little podcast. And so that's how it started. And I said, you know what? I am going to start a podcast, and I'm going to target these I guess, hidden gem prospects that not a lot of people know about, and give them a platform, what they can offer an NFL organization, what is their production, where did they go to school and high school. And so that's where it started, man. It was really about working with those smaller agents and being loyal to them and saying, you know what? Yeah, I am going to invest in your clients, even though they're not the big guys. They may be late round picks, undrafted free agents, but I just wanted to make sure that I was being transparent with them. And so that was how it started.
Did you ever feel any affinity with them as the guy kind of creating your, because you're not connected to a larger media organization, right? You have kind of self-created ProFootballChase,
right?
Began with a Facebook or Instagram page and kind of has expanded a little bit from there, right?
Yeah.
Did you ever identify with some of those guys, scratching and clawing, trying to find their way forward?
Absolutely. I've always been the underdog. I've always been, in football, I was always undersized. I was always a late bloomer, and my academics, once I got to Reagan High School in San Antonio, I was always trailing my best friends. And so I was always a step or two steps behind everybody, it felt like. And so for me, I always took that passion to say, man, you know what? People count me out. I'm always going to be kind of the second fiddle here. And so I did find that connection with those types of players that said, hey, man, we've been training and working just as hard as the top blue chip players, but we don't necessarily get the same type of coverage. And I could relate to that. And so, because at the end of the day, right, it's not where you start, it's where you finish.
Right.
And so we kind of always hit that. And so in my podcast, I'd make sure I was giving them the same type of exposure. And to your point, my podcast was just really a baby at the time. And so growing with them up the ladder. And so it was really cool to kind of establish those relationships, get, people saying, you know what, I respect this guy because he's giving everybody a chance to get on. I'm not being selective and saying, oh, you know what, you're coming from a D2 school, I don't have time for you. It was more so like, no, let's get you on the podcast and then let's grow together.
There've been moments in that I can imagine where things felt hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
And things felt harder than you might have anticipated when you got started, right? What, if anything, from growing up, kind of as a pastor's kid turned bishop's kid, at what point did your dad become a bishop? Was that after high school for you, or at some point earlier than that?
So 2016, right? I believe that's when he first got elected. And
so you would have been in college.
Yeah, I was in college. And so that's when they had moved all the way to Kansas. I was just starting at UT Arlington. So they were, I remember that day, they moved me in and boom, they hit it off.
We're going to see Dorothy in Kansas.
Yep,
all right?
We're going to the Midwest.
Okay. So you spent most of your dad was in seminary when you were born, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you grew up as a preacher's kid. I've had any number of people tell me I don't count as a preacher's kid. My mom spent 17 years in ministry before she retired, but she graduated seminary the same year I graduated high school.
Okay.
And so a buddy of mine around here has said, unless you've had a church member walk into your house and say, oh, that used to be my couch, you don't count as a preacher's kid, right? So the life of a preacher's kid is a unique one, right?
Right.
But what parts of that have been kind of help form and shape who you are, right? And help guide you as you've made your way through the last 5 to 7 years of building this professional enterprise kind of from the ground up.
One of the main things I feel like I benefited being a preacher's kid is the communication skills, like really being around my dad and my mom, at church and learning how to interact with diverse people, because I think sometimes it could be a little bit intimidating for some people that don't want to come out of their shell because they really don't know how to connect with various different types of people. They're grown in a household where things are closed off. But being as a preacher's kid, I mean, being in many environments, moving and having to meet new friends and leaving good friends behind and learning that there's going to be obstacles in every move. And even though it wasn't ideal at times when I felt like, man, like when we were living in the Valley in Edinburgh, we had been there 10 years and I had developed some very strong friends from elementary school all the way. I was a freshman there in Edinburgh. That's when we learned, hey, we're moving to San Antonio, when I was going to be a sophomore in high school. And so I at the time, I was very like a little bit concerned and stressed about it. Like, man, we're going to move. I have so many good friends. But looking back on it, I'm grateful that I had those opportunities to change schools and to have that vast change because it really allowed me how to adapt, be adaptable, develop strong communication skills, learn how to communicate when I was a kid with my parents' friends, and like other pastors and clergy. And so I was in middle school and high school and college being able to have these really deep conversations with other clergy and getting that experience to talk with people that were on different walks of life, I think really sharpened my skills to be able to say, you know what, I don't fear talking to anybody because I've kind of grown up in that circumstance.
You've been forced into being the new guy in the room again and again and again. And I think, it's fascinating to sit on this side of it, right? Because in that way, I didn't count as a preacher's kid. I never had to move because my mom got reappointed, right? I moved off to college and then she moved for an appointment, right? But I've watched my own kids do it. My kids are 12, 8, and 2, right? And they've had to restart their lives. And yet, a number of different times over the years. And yet, like you say, it's an opportunity to build new relationships in new ways and to meet new people, right? Because the Church of Jesus Christ is this wonderfully diverse, weird mix of quirky people, right?
Yeah.
But turns out the world is this wonderfully diverse mix of weird and quirky people. And so it gives you a window into getting to connect with different people along the way in that way. When you think about life and faith today, you're in your late 20s, right? Mid to late 20s. And kind of a part of that, you're a unicorn within the life of the church, right? Every church wants about 20 of you these days. Isaac, what does faith look like for you day in and day out, especially as somebody whose life is dominated by something that is also Sunday-centric?
Yeah, so right now living in San Antonio, and so my brother Ruben is a senior pastor at Christ Fellowship United Methodist Church, and so being involved there, I'm a drummer. I've been playing the drums my whole life.
Nice.
So I do offer my time as a drummer at least 2-3 times a month on Sundays. I'm playing with our worship team, and so it is hard sometimes because what I do is Sundays is game day, and so church is also Sunday, and so sometimes with my work and finding news from people because I'm getting alerted that so-and-so is going to be inactive, a player. And so I'm over here trying to work and get this information. It's like, well, man, I got to be at church at 8 a.m. to do rehearsal. And so sometimes I'm like running back and forth trying to make sure that I'm getting everything out that I need to for football, but also trying to keep that sacred time at church and trying to find that time to say, you know what, I got to dedicate this for my faith and to God. And I, have to come to that realization that football is going to be there, right? But I have to take care of my Sunday business and make sure that, hey, I'm being spiritually fed. And so on a day-to-day basis, it's just making sure that I'm staying engaged, I'm staying in tune with my faith. And I think I find that in the relationships that I've built with players because I'm constantly checking in on them. Hey, man, how you doing? how's your injury doing? How you doing mentally? Are you enjoying your new team? If they just signed with a new team and they're uprooting their families, and
Yeah.
so I feel like that's like my ministry, being able to
Mm.
kind of make sure that they're good and let them know that I'm not just interested in the connection for my podcast or for my brand, but it's like a general sincere ministry that I want them to know that I'm praying for you, man, or you got hurt, how you doing, praying for your recovery, making sure that they know that, wow, this guy not only values me just as a player, but he genuinely wants to make sure I'm doing good as a human being.
Yeah.
Which is very important, not just in sports, but as you said, in churches, in our faith, making sure that everybody is being accounted for, making sure that everybody is being valued, because if you're not showing a sense of care in God's love to everybody we come to know, it's like, how can we grow as a church?
Yeah.
And so I think that's a big part in solidifying the step number one, of being faithful.
Well, and it's so powerful of a reminder, right? We often expect God to show up in these big supernatural ways, and God does, sometimes in ways we radically unexpect and that we can't explain. But most often, the Christ people are going to encounter is the Christ in you that's checking up on somebody.
Right.
When you don't have a financial incentive to do so or a business building incentive to do so, but just says, I care about you because of you, who you are, right?
Right.
And I'm going to be invested in your life. I think that's a powerful reminder. We just wrapped up a season talking to our college ministers and our youth directors, and one of the key things that they named for connecting to folks in their teens and early 20s, right, is the powerful importance of authenticity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just to be you, right? We had one youth director say when they're searching for youth volunteers, they look for the quirkiest people in the church, right? Are you a cat lady? Do you go to Comic-Con? Or,
Yeah.
are you going to have a hard time finding your way elsewhere in the church? But you know fully who you are and you're comfortable being you.
Mm-hmm.
Be that, right? And so I love that you are following up. You are hoping to build a professional organization here, right? You're hoping to build your name and your brand as this NFL insider, but it's not at the sacrifice of turning people into things to be used, right? You're
Right.
still seeing the God image
Right.
in them in the midst of that.
Right.
In your time in building this digital media network and brand, right? Digital media changes so quickly, right? I'm sure you've seen some evolution along the way. I know in 15 years of doing church ministry, we've seen evolutions along the way where things are just radically different. I remember the first Sunday we streamed and we thought we were hot stuff, right?
Yeah.
And the cameras were terrible. I mean, it was 10 years ago, so, but cameras were terrible. The stream, the network wasn't very good. But now it's like a requirement that everybody's got to have reasonably decent cameras. You got to have a decent stream, or you're not even in the game anymore, right?
Right.
Remember when social media pages came out for the first time and we just decided it was this big announcement board, right? Everybody's going, you just could put your announcements out there and like, no, it's the place to tell your story, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've seen those changes over time. On the church side of things, what changes have you seen kind of in the evolution of digital media space as one of our experts in that space? And, after that, what advice might you give to churches as they seek to continue to make disciples of Jesus Christ, utilizing a tool that's a part of your everyday life?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it's without having a live stream on Sunday, you're out of the game, man. I mean, every church now these days is almost like a mandatory thing because everything is so digital. And sometimes you have people that can't physically get up to church, right? But they also rely so much on the streaming because they still want to find a message on a Sunday. And so sometimes even if you're under different circumstances or you're traveling and you just can't get to church, it's big because with no social media or no coverage, you're missing a chance to reach somebody. And so, as to your point, I have seen it change a lot. And I remember when I first started my personal page, ProFootballChase, Instagram was kind of like in its baby steps. Not a whole lot of people knew about it. And that's why I was like, you know what? Let's try this platform and kind of give it a go. But now everything is just so magnified. And now you're getting TikTok is getting big and all these other platforms. And so when you're not focused on it, you could lose track and lose grips real quick. And I'm sure that's something you've noticed. Like,
for sure,
man, if we're not staying on top of it, we're going to be left behind.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I've done some contract work with schools and with churches and kind of, how are some ways we can stay relevant. And so Podcasting is obviously a big thing, and so it's a way to stay engaged with your congregation. And whether it's something like as simple of starting a podcast, like, hey, what's your God moment of the week? You know, what was something you were touched by on Sunday? Or starting a prayer chain, like, hey, let's do little connect cards on Sunday and check, you know, what you need prayer for, strength, patience, and let's talk about it on the podcast. You know, because in the DFW Metroplex, you're going to travel 30 minutes, you know, after work, to and from work. And so you get something to listen to, and it's keeping you engaged and it's keeping you in tune with your church community. And I think that's important because you're going to be able to keep people informed also with a podcast. It's like, I know a lot of churches are using social media for announcements, right? Like, hey, coming up, school just started. I'm sure there's been a lot of events, and we're going to have a luncheon, or we're going to do baptisms. Well, on podcasts and in digital media, YouTube, that's another opportunity to get on there and say, hey, coming up August 29th, we have a big back to church bash. Come out, you know, we're going to have food. And so constantly using social media to announce those things, and for families to say, hey, I wasn't able to be at church, but I caught it on YouTube, on Facebook, you know, and now I know I'm going to put it on my calendar. And so that's a chance to connect people that may not necessarily be present in the church, but it's another avenue to keep people connected, because I think with the emergence of it and everything that you're able to accomplish, it's like, why not use it for church in order to grow the kingdom? So I think that's very important too.
I love your emphasis, your challenge, right? To just do it, right? We don't have to do it perfectly, right? Sometimes we wonder, are we doing it perfectly and all of that? Just do it, and do it consistently, right? Be consistent about it. We're in our 20s in terms of episodes of Pod Strangely Warm. The podcast at my previous church, we got 120 episodes in before I got moved. But one of the things that we believed deeply in was the power of consistency, right? Dustin, who's our producer, hey Dustin, he gets a shout out periodically, sent us an article just recently that said, you know, there's 2 million podcasts out there, right? If you get to episode 4, you've made it among the, like, 1.8 million of people or podcasts don't make it to episode 4, right? And then if you get to episode 20, you've made it to you're a 1%er, right? Only 20,000 of the 2 million podcasts make it to episode 20. So that's a challenge and an invitation to consistency, right?
Right.
You're a 1/10 of 1%er over here, you know, with both reach and with just consistency in podcasting, right? So I feel like, how many times have our churches kickstarted a new social media movement, right? We've tagged the 20-year-old to go, all right, you take the Instagram thing, take some pictures, tell our story, great. And we do it for 1 week. Or we do it once a week for this week, and then 3 times next week, and then we skip 3 weeks, right? Being consistent in those platforms, it is critically important, right? How do we make sure that, whether it's perfect or not, we are there and present again and again and again?
Yeah.
When you think about your brand, you mentioned that TikTok's come around. Have you been a guy who tries all the platforms, or have you kind of stuck to a couple of specific ones?
So I've honed in on Instagram as my largest following, and then Facebook second, Twitter's third. And so, speaking of TikTok, I actually just created an account like a couple of weeks ago, because I've seen that more. I've never been into TikTok. I know a lot of people, especially like the younger, you know, high school kids, they're all over TikTok. And so I said, I know it's a little bit of a different platform because it's faster videos and quicker segments. And so I said, you know what? I could carve out a little bit of a vision to do like quick game previews on TikTok and giving my input on matchups and player injuries and news that I'm getting. And so I actually just did start a TikTok account, and I uploaded a video and just like, hey, I'm on TikTok, you know, and sending that over to Instagram and getting some people to follow me over there. And so, yeah, to answer your question, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter have been the main hubs for me. But now I may do a little bit of TikTok, and then YouTube is another one that I'm going to tap into this season, because that's where you can get a whole lot more viewership and more buzz, and making sure that people are starting to go. Because if you haven't realized by now, like, we have cameras here. People like being able to watch and seeing, not only listening, but also seeing like what's going on. And so I think the element of video is very important too. And so YouTube and TikTok, that's what that brings. You're more on camera.
Right.
And so I think a lot of people have a draw to that, and so I think it's important. So I'm definitely looking into growing on those platforms and trying to strengthen those two as we get ready for the new season.
Okay. We've talked about the evolution in social media. I want to spend a little time talking about an evolution that's happening within football and maybe what it might say to us as an evolution that might be happening within the church, right? We're all Dallas Cowboys fans here, right?
How about them Cowboys?
I grew up in the era of Troy, Emmett, and Michael, right? And Emmitt Smith was the running back. He was the engine for that. Troy and Michael did great things, right? But Emmett was the bell cow, right? With Daryl Moose Johnston plowing the way ahead in front of him. We've transitioned eras in the NFL from where in the days of Emmett and Barry Sanders, right, the running back was key, right? Central to what your team was building, to the point now where running backs, even the best of them, have a hard time getting a second contract. That's one of the themes of this summer for NFL fans, right? Whether it's Saquon Barkley or somebody else.
Josh Jacobs,
any number of folks, right? The guy out in Indianapolis,
Jonathan Taylor,
right? They've struggled to get that second contract, right? Not that they don't want to be on the team, but the NFL has moved from we're not paying you for past performance, right? They've had that real shift, and so the whole network is different. You have what's your take on that? But then secondarily, you sit in a wonderfully interesting place, right? You are both an insider in the life of the church, right? Your dad's a bishop, your brothers are pastors, you play drums on Sunday mornings, but you also get to sit on the outside looking in as somebody who's deeply invested in another kind of unique part of our culture. What kind of shifts are you seeing within the life of the church as somebody who's got 1 foot inside, 1 foot outside, that maybe we have blinders to as those of us who are kind of jumped with both feet full in church, day in, day out?
Yeah, I think, well, number one, I think the growth of social media and being able to utilize, I guess, higher upgraded equipment on Sunday mornings. You used to be able to walk in and it's like, hey, we have an acoustic set today. We're just going to play with the cajon and we have an acoustic guitar. And so now it's like, because of those streaming services now, it's important that you have hookups to have audio, being able to show up on the feeds, and people are craving high energy now. People want to come into a service that's alive and you feel an instant movement, where I think number one, hospitality teams. I think that's been an evolution in the years as an outsider and both having that foot in the door. It's like before, you had your occasional greeters with your bulletins. Now bulletins are barely even used now. Most churches is like everything's mobile. Everything is going on Facebook. Even online giving now is huge. Or, rarely in contemporary services you see the offering buckets being passed around because it's online give. So that's a trend. But yeah, the hospitality now, it's like it's big. I've been at churches where you got people driving around in these little scooters and like, hey, we'll take you to this entrance. And so I think that is huge because people want to feel valued when they're on a church campus.
Yeah.
I think before, back in the older traditional days, it was more so it's like, yeah, we're going to church and don't worry too much about having greeters or having a team that's aligned with, okay, this is what you're going to say, go take them to their seat. Now, if you don't have a good hospitality system, chances are you're going to have a hard time retaining people on a second visit, if they're visiting your church. And so I think that's been a big trend that has changed. Another thing is also just the life of the church. What's going on outside Sundays is another big deal. It's like families are looking for ways to plug in, like at Christ Fellowship. There's food trucks that are literally right around the corner. Yeah. And so that's an avenue for people who want to go eat at food trucks during the week. Well, my brother's very strategic, and he's like, well, I'm going to go out there. I'm going to meet with some people. And, hey, look, our church is right there. We're worshiping on Sundays. And so I think outgoing, making sure that you're starting to schedule church events around main flow things, food trucks, going to games at middle schools and high schools. Like I've done some high school announcing for San Antonio, and on Friday nights, a lot of families, band member families are there. Well, if you're a pastor, it may be in your best interest to go out there to those events, go where the people are, because that's where everything is trending. If you're not where people are, chances are, ever since COVID with the pandemic, when everything really shut down, I think a lot of families got used to not going to church on Sunday because Sunday became another day in the week. Everything was shut down. And so now that COVID's gone, it's making sure that you're reiterating to people, hey, our doors are open on Sunday mornings, and you got to go find the people now. Before, I think people used to be more like, well, I'm going to go seek out a church. Now it's more so, you're a pastor, if you're a leader in the church, you got to do your part even more now. And door to door ain't going to cut it. Social media now is big. So sending out Facebook messages and constantly, texting people and just making sure that there's a good sense of communication, there's a good sense of hospitality, and making sure that everything that you do on Sunday mornings is intentional about getting people fired up for Jesus Christ, wanting to be involved in the church, and having, good equipment. I think goes a long way. Is like, hey, people see this is a good equipment, good band, good sound, good hospitality. And so I think that really makes the well-rounded experience. And I think that's how it's really changed these last several years.
What a powerful vision that is, right? A community of radical belonging that is inward in that when you are here, we are here locked in on you. Right. But then during the week is pushing outward always and everywhere, looking for those places and spaces. Now, I do think that Ruben has an opportunity here that he's missing out on based on what you've just described, right? Keeping an eye out for the needs specific of constituents in his community, right? People of his community. I think there's some pro football insiders who could use a Saturday night service.
Yes,
right?
I agree.
Think,
100%.
So this is your opportunity to look into the camera and sell your brother as to why he needs a Saturday night service. Don't you think?
Saturday night service. If you're watching, bro, I think it definitely would benefit, me, that I can have that worship on Saturday. That way, Sunday morning, a little bit more flexibility. I don't have to be, on my phone behind the drum kit, tweeting out stuff. So Saturday service sounds pretty appealing. I can lead it. I can lead worship, just all kinds of things.
There you go. And he just said that energy is key. And if there's energy coming from anywhere in the midst of a service, the drummer is a part of it. So you kind of want your drummer really drumming here.
If I need to be a one-man show, give me a mic. I can sing, drum at the same time,
Okay. It sounds like it's done, right?
Hey, it may not sound the best, but you definitely create some energy, some sound,
It'll get people talking, right?
Right. It'll get people thinking, man, that was interesting. Maybe we'll go back again.
I've always said, if God can speak through Balaam's donkey, hey, God can work in lots of interesting ways. So one-man band, we could do, works in an interesting way. Isaac, thank you so much for your time, man. Thank you for stopping in while you're here in DFW and giving us some wisdom. And know that as you launch into this football season where we know you will be busy and busy and busy and busy, we hope and pray that it is everything you dream it might be, but we also hope and pray that you can continue to carve those moments in which you are connected to God and God is pouring into your spirit and your soul so that you might continue to do not only your work but your ministry of being there for the players who you are connected with, for those agents who are a part of your life, that your work might be a ministry in and to itself.
Well, I really appreciate you having me, and especially those in the background that sometimes their work doesn't go noticed. I've noticed that that's always something big. Without them, this does not go on. So I appreciate their effort, their time connecting, reaching out to me, and then you as well. It's been a pleasure chatting here. And you mentioned agents, and what we all are is agents for Jesus Christ. We're going to go out there and meet people. We're going to try to grow the church. And so, looking forward to the season. We're getting ready. We're ramping up. Hopefully, Dallas Cowboys, Super Bowl champions, the Texas Rangers. We have a chance at a World Series.
That's it.
So we got to have a title here in Dallas.
And maybe Luka and Kyrie can make the playoffs. right?
Maybe this year they get into the playoffs.
Let's aim for that. Thank you so much for joining us today on Pod Strangely Warmed. For Isaac, Saenz, I am Daniel Hawkins. We are so thankful that you've been here with us as we launch into this new season. If this conversation has been fun or meaningful for you, make sure you share it. Make sure you don't let it stop with you, that you engage somebody else as an ambassador of Jesus Christ or an agent of Jesus Christ along the way, that we might continue to grow this community as a community that is shaping and forming the Church of Jesus Christ. Until next time, thanks again for being here on Pod Strangely Warmed. When are we gonna get you on here?
Yeah, you can bring her on Mondays after the Cowboys win.
Oh,
Okay.
wow.
Only those
I'll
Mondays?
be decked out.
Yeah,
in
they
my
lose.
jersey.
Okay.